Hello and welcome to this segment of Essential Elements. My name is Michael McSheehan. I'm the Coordinator of Technical Assistance for the Swift Education Center. The Swift Education Center is a national technical assistance center that builds the capacity of schools to provide academic behavior support to improve outcomes for all students through equity-based inclusive education. Our work has been funded through a federal grant for 5 years and now has evolved to work with multiple states around our country with a thrust and a focus on multi-tiered system of support at the heart of instructional well-being for all students within our local schools. Our work now expands from our original states of New Hampshire, Vermont, Maryland, Mississippi, and Oregon to include California, Washington, and right here in Indiana. Today's focus of Essential Elements, as I said, is going to pay attention to the particular components of a multi-tiered system of support. So let me tell you a little bit about what I mean by that phrase, and then some of the subcomponents that would help us think about what that framework looks like both in action and as we're thinking about leading it within our local school and district systems. So what is MTSS? A multi-tiered system of support, as we conceive it now in 2018, is a system and a structure for all students. We think about a continuum of support for all students, whether that student is high achieving in mathematics, struggling as a reader, coming from a home experience or a context of poverty, if that student's a new American who's an English language learner, or a student with a disability. We think about what are the systems and structures that could come together in one coherent framework to support all students. We're really fortunate to build this work on the shoulders of 4 decades of great work examining what are the best practices for academic achievement, social emotional well-being, behavioral supports, as well as the inclusion of all kids within the mainstream of their local public neighborhood schools. As I said, our framework from the Swift Education Center does place MTSS at the heart of a framework that intends to help schools bring coherence to all the multiple initiatives that they have underway within their local system. MTSS for us is supported in some really important kind of 4 chunks or 4 domains of work that make MTSS what it is and brings it alive in the local school. So although today we're going to talk about the essential elements of that one particular heart of the work, I want to make sure to be clear that there are supporting domains of the work that bring it alive locally. So that would include administrative leadership. How are we thinking about the distributed structures in a school that bring teacher leaders and administrators together to implement the change that's desired locally? And how are we gearing up to support educators with job-embedded professional learning? That's one domain of the work. Another important aspect of the work is to rethink the integrated education framework. And what that aims toward or looks toward is service delivery models. How are we using all of the various gifted staff that we have in our local system? How are we thinking about arrangements for collaborative teaching? How are we thinking about school-wide schedules? And what's the culture that exists for those adults to come together to do that work? So an integrated education framework brings MTSS alive by systematizing the school-wide structures and an eye toward the school-wide culture of MTSS. The third domain of work is family and community engagement. So as we look to a two-way relationship with our family partners, with our community partners, how is the school organized to both provide information and supports out to a family or community, and how does that come inward to support the schools to thrive locally? So how do schools open their doors as community centers and give back, as well as take full advantage of the local possible volunteer corps that exists in a local community? And finally, inclusive policy structure and practice. And this actually has 2 really important features in it. One feature has an eye toward our school and our district partnership. We don't want central office to be something that's off to the side with schools kind of existing in support on their own. We want to make sure that that is a positive, collaborative relationship between schools and their local education agencies, the district central office structures, so that there's a give and take in thinking about what's working within our schools and how is our district engaged in supporting and leading that. The last part of an inclusive policy structure and practice is how is the district organized to learn about what's working in their schools and scale that up across the local district. So how is a district organized to learn about which policies, which practices seem to be most effective and powerful, have the highest impact on their learners, and then scale that up across schools? What are the bright spots in your system that really work locally, and how can we make sure to grow and expand and learn from those instead of having to reinvent the wheel in every individual school within a local system? Those 4 domains of work give MTSS a particular local culture, local flavor. So let me go into the kind of core essential elements of MTSS and then bring us back to how we personalize that to the local system. You see here a graphic that we've been using at the Swift Education Center to try to communicate the general framework of a multi-tiered system of support. And again, being really clear that this framework is intended to apply across content areas, whether we're talking about academics, reading, math, social studies, science, social emotional well-being and learning, mental health services and supports, behavior, and thinking about how all of that comes together so that kids are included within the mainstream of their local school. The framework lays out on 2 sides of the image here, the supports that we have for students and the supports that we are organizing within our local school system. So we think about the tiered instructional approach, an additive instructional approach beginning with good first best instruction, a core universal experience that all students have to learn the local standards academically, behaviorally, social emotionally, and how we deliver that universal support in a way that reaches the overwhelming majority of our students, meaning that they're able to achieve and meet our expectations locally as measured by our priority standards within our system. For students who have not responded, who have not met those expectations through that first best teach, we add on some additional support for some students within the system. And then finally, for some students, we may have to really intensify our support structures across the day for them to be able to meet those expectations. So let me unpack each of those kind of 3 tiers, as some people will refer to them, and tell you a little bit more about how they come together in the local system. So let's dig into some of the kind of core pieces across all 3 tiers, and then I'd like to take a dive into each tier and unpack some essential practices for each tier. As we look across all tiers of support for all students within our system, we want to have an eye toward universal design for learning. There's another essential elements presentation by Louis Lord Nelson, which lays out for you some of those essential considerations in universal design for learning. The thing I want to communicate here is that for us at the Swift Education Center, UDL is an organizing force across all aspects of the supports that we provide. It's not just a framework that we would apply to Tier 1 instruction, but of course it's for the additional and for the intensified supports. And as Louie lays out in her Essential Elements video, UDL pays attention to how we are engaging our students within the learning, connecting to their local learning experience, their motivation to engage within that structure, providing lots of options for them to engage with high effort and persistence through tasks. We think about multiple means of representation of our information, how we're providing options, for example, for comprehension, and looking at action and expression considerations. What are the variety of ways that students can show what they know and show what and how they're learning for us? Differentiation, we can do the best design that we can within our local system, that best prepared plan that then we usually have to kind of set slightly aside to look at how our students have actually responded to our plans. And then we differentiate based on how our students are responding. So meeting each individual student where they're at from that instruction that we've provided. So differentiation is occurring across all tiers of support. And finally, we use a language to refer to an integrated system. And for us within multi-tiered system of support, integrated means two things. One, integrated across content areas, right? We want to teach to the whole student. We're not just teaching to reading per se, we're teaching to a live human being who has behaviors and social emotional thinking and feeling within that reading context. So we want to integrate across content to address the whole child that's in front of us. And we want to think about our integrated systems of support to develop one integrated comprehensive system of support for our students. So integrated here is also looking across service delivery models from our title programs, special education, general education, to bring all of the resources to bear for the students that are right in front of us in our local schools. So with that notion of UDL, differentiation, and integration across all the tiers, now let's take that deeper dive to the individual tiers and key practices for each tier. You see within this graphic, all of the arrows are pointing to the support part of our frame. So as we think about how we organize our supports across the tiers, you'll see some repeated practices that are essential elements for each individual tier. Let's start with universal support. In universal support, we have an eye toward how we're bringing together the adults in the building for integrated teams. So we want our team memberships who are planning and organizing for that first best instruction to meet our prioritized standards, to include the representation of the expertise that would be needed to pull that off within our schools. So our teams are an essential starting point for that planning process. Data is an essential aspect of universal planning as well. We're going to have local assessment information, whether that be from universal screeners, benchmark assessments, statewide accountability assessments, lots of data sources that we need to leverage for the decisions for how we will approach that universal instruction for our students. The data is also going to let us know then who is or is not responding to that first best instruction. Evidence-based practices means we want to kind of have an eye as we're putting together our universal support on what are the high impact, high leverage practices that we can use. In 2018, we know that not all instruction is created equal. Some instructional approaches give us a higher impact on student learning across content areas. So locally, we would like to have what Jim Knight refers to as an instructional playbook. What are some of the go-to instructional strategies that we know are most likely to be successful in helping our students achieve our expectations? And finally, an eye toward continuous improvement. Every time we go through a teaching experience and a learning experience, we're then looking back to the data, collecting ourselves together in our teams, looking at the practices that we leverage to see, did it meet what we were hoping for? Did it achieve our vision? What parts of that can we get better at doing? What parts really worked that we want to hold on to and keep doing in the future? How will we sustain those best practices within our local building? So an eye toward continuous improvement processes throughout the universal system. Let's move up to additional support. And I just want to kind of restate here as an essential element, this is an additive model. So all students experience the universal support. And then we're going to add on something for students who need greater academic challenge, students who may need us to kind of go back and do a reteach in reading, in math, or maybe students who need us to focus on specific skills that are holding them back from performing at the next level up. So additional supports are efficient, rapid response systems so that we're not waiting for students to fail, but instead we're looking at our local data, an essential element here across the system. We're looking at that data to see if we can predict if there are students that maybe are at risk of not getting the challenge that they need, or maybe at risk of some kind of academic or behavioral challenge. Some of the key data sources we're looking at, again, we're going back to that universal screening data. So screening in reading, in math, in behavior is organized to help us predict if a student might be at risk. And we're looking at data from that first universal best instruction that we provided to see how we want to organize that additional support. So the teams that are coming together to look at this data and make the decisions about the additional supports tailored to those student needs. Now need to include an expanded set of members. So we think about expanded grade level and teaching teams. So we're bringing in maybe some social work conversations. We're bringing in maybe our local literacy expert into the conversation. How can we up the kind of support, the focus of support, the amount of time of support for students to get to that local proficiency standard? When we think about the intention behind additional support, it's still to get students to our expectations. So these expanded grade level and teaching teams are just thinking a little bit more broadly and a little bit more specifically. It's a both and within this support to get to students the additional support that they might need to meet those expectations. We may be using more specific interventions at this point, again with an eye toward what has the research told us about the most effective interventions for students for particular skill sets. And of course, looking toward continuous improvement processes. So what within our additional support system is working well for students and working well for our teachers, and what might we tweak and enhance going forward, and what do we want to maintain and sustain over time. Let's move to now intensified support. And before I get into this notion of kind of, again, adding on support, I want to first step back to think about intensified support as an opportunity to examine what's happening for a student all day long. So at the center, when we think about intensifying support, it's looking at all the opportunities for learning that a student may experience all day long to see how can we focus and intensify the learning opportunity for students, the learning experience for students, the materials that they're using, the prompts, the cues, the instructional approaches that we're using throughout the entire day. So for us, intensified support is not just another 60 minutes of reading intervention or math intervention or social skills intervention. Intensifying supports means a re-examination, stepping back to look at the entire day in a student's life and how we're coming together to support that. Some essential elements for the intensified support include, of course, those expanded grade and teaching teams. For some students, we may now really be doing kind of a full wraparound experience for students, bringing in other community partners, mental health support agencies, other experts within content areas, academics, reading, math, science, in order to tailor the supports. We may be now looking at different data sources where we're not just looking at what the response has been thus far by the student to our instructional approaches, but also really wanting to pinpoint and answer the question, what's holding this student back from performing at the next level up? So I don't want to just broadly give lots of good instruction in reading. I want to ask, what are the specific aspects of reading that are preventing you from performing at the next level up as a reader? That's where I want to target and intensify the support for that student so that we can lift their achievement. If they're struggling in reading writ large, I want to find out, is this an issue that's holding you back because of how you work with words and deal with decoding of single syllable words or multisyllabic words? Is the area that's holding you back more about language comprehension, background knowledge, understanding of schemas and text structures? Or is it really about how you put all of those skills together, the print processing, the fluency challenge of integrating all those skills while you're reading real text? So what's the bucket that's really holding the student back? That's where we want to intervene and look at intensifying supports across the day for a student. So the intervention sets that we're using are not only evidence-based, but also are informed and selected by diagnostic data sets, not diagnosing again for labels, but to diagnose and pinpoint the intervention matched to a student. Matching becomes a really important aspect of multi-tiered system of support when we're talking about intensified arenas of support. I want to match the best approach for an individual student. I want to match the best approach that's going to align curricularly with the rest of the day. I don't want a student who kind of feels like they have to go read one way with Mrs. Jones and then a different way with Mr. Smith, right? I want to think about matching my instructional approaches that's going to bring together curricular coherence across the day for a student, not make them work harder. And I want to think about matching the right interventionists across the day. So who are the right players who will have the best connection with this student in the learning arenas across the student's day? So matching is an essential aspect of what we're doing in intensifying supports. And finally, that continuous improvement question. Across all aspects of the system, we're always looking for what works and how we can grow and sustain that, and what can we get better at doing, and what will it take to grow and sustain those aspects of the system. MTSS for us, again, is putting all of that together in a seamless system. While our graphic shows you some kind of space and reinforces this visual notion of separate tiers, universal, additional, intensified, we really want to kind of break that down a little bit to say this is a much more fluid and responsive system. We're talking about not kids who get tier 2 support, but what are the kind of particular additional supports that work for students. It's not an all day, all the time event, right? You're not sentenced to tier 2 for 6 months and then we'll revisit and find out what's happening for you. We're going to do that in particular timely fashions, 6 or 8 weeks, try out something, come back, see if the student got on track. Maybe we discontinue that additional support. Same thing with intensified. We're going to provide the support for as long and at the intensity level that's going to bring that student up to our local expectations, or help them exceed if they're needing that extra academic or social, emotional, or behavioral challenge. So it's one comprehensive system. That really hits the support and the intervention parts of the work. So that was a lot of information in a really short period of time. I hope that it helps you kind of consider or maybe reconsider some of the essential elements of multi-tiered system of support. In this segment, I hope I've also conveyed the importance of having a clearly articulated local vision of what you want those essential elements to look like in your system in order to achieve your vision for students. Our vision within our center is that it's totally possible and very doable for us to transform the face of education, such that we're not only achieving academic, behavioral, social, emotional excellence for our students, but we're also creating equitable environments for our students, where kids from all different walks of life are engaged in their local neighborhood school in a way that is meaningful for each and every individual student, leaving us with that notion of all means all, if and only if it covers each and every individual student. And hopefully through these essential elements of a multi-tiered system of support, we can achieve that vision. Thank you for your time and your engagement during this segment of Essential Elements with a focus on multi-tiered system of support.